A major update in the Liam Payne case. The two men charged in his death are now set to face trial. So what does all this mean? We're breaking down the case so far and hearing from an expert about what we can expect ahead. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. One of our first ever Scandal videos was actually about Liam Payne because this case is such a mystery. I mean, if we break it down, first of all, it's a total shock. This is a young, relatively healthy guy, very, attractive, talented, got a huge following. And then he tragically dies out of the blue. I mean, that part's crazy. And then the next part that's crazy, the investigation. What really happened? What led up to his death? Was he unconscious during the fall, after the fall, before? All of that. So many questions about this case. But there are a few things that we know right now for sure, that two people who interacted with Liam Payne leading up to his death are now going to face a trial of their own. Before we get into all of that, though, let's begin with a quick refresher of the case, okay? So this takes us back to October 16th of last year. That's the day that Liam Payne died. He was 31 years old at the time, and it happened in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Now, the reason that he was in Argentina in the first place is because one of his former One Direction bandmates, Niall Horan, was actually touring, and so he's set to perform there. And so Liam, a good friend, flies in, is gonna hang out, he brings his girlfriend, actually, Kate Cassidy. They're there, they're going to see Niall, they're gonna watch the performance, all of that stuff. So honestly, he's there as like a good friend, supportive band member, all of that. So he travels with his girlfriend, as I said, Kate Cassidy, and they stay in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires, and they specifically stay at a place called Casa Sur Hotel. And this is really important because it becomes a crime scene, and people who were there were eventually charged into all of this. So as I said, they're there, Buenos Aires, and they're having kind of a vacation. However, Kate Cassidy ends up leaving on October 14th. She's going to head home back to the United States. But before that, she notes, Liam Payne seemed totally normal. There's no red flags. Everything seems great. All was well. She heads home having, no worries about all of this. However, there have since been other reports that have come out talking about Liam and how he was acting, saying that it was kind of off, that he had been drinking or he had been using some sort of substances, that he seemed under the influence of something. According to some reports, he was actually saying, "Oh, I'm so messed up. I'm acting like this because I was in a boy band." And I want to pause really quickly here because I've done multiple other videos on Liam Payne here on Scandal, and then before that on Law&Crime News. And they get a lot of comments, a lot of people who are very intense about the case. And I want to say straight up, I'm not knocking Liam Payne. I'm not knocking One Direction in any way. In fact, in order to get this job here on Scandal, I sang a One Direction song. So do with that what you will, but when I'm talking about this or talking about the drugs in his system or the alcohol, really in any sort of case, I'm not saying like, oh, he shouldn't have been doing that. No, what I'm saying is this is just the facts as we have them. I mean, I'm not judging him at all for any sort of this substance use, number one. And number two, I'm not judging him because he was in a boy band. I've listened to many a boy band back in my day. Okay, now back to Liam and how he was acting leading up to his death. As I said, there were some reports that he said this stuff about being in a boy band, and there are other reports that hotel staff knew that something was off. Some of the reports I've seen were that he threw a fit in the lobby. One of the reports is that he got so angry he broke a laptop and later was dragged up to his room. And on our last video, I went through and looked at the comments because I really value what you guys have to say. So thank you for commenting and sending any of your tips to our email, which is scandal@lawandcrime.com. I love seeing all of those things. And a lot of you people were talking about and saying, "Hey, Sierra, why aren't you talking about this? There are rumors or there's word that he was actually foaming at the mouth at the time. There is word that he was having seizures." So I've seen this, I see you, and I hear you. However, the reason that I didn't report this as fact is because I haven't seen this as fact from Argentinian authorities. So there are rumors online, and it could be true. He could have had a seizure. His mouth could have been foaming. There could be these problems, but it's not fact. I mean, a lot of this, that's really this case in general. We don't know for sure. Was there video recording in his room so we knew the exact time of the fall or what happened? No. So there's still questions. But anyway, I want to say that's one of the rumors that potentially happened. What we do know for sure, though, is that someone from the hotel called emergency responders when Liam went up to his room on that day, October 16th. And they called and said, "We're really worried. There's this man here who's acting kind of off. He has a balcony in his room, so we're nervous he could hurt himself or he could hurt others." But by the time first responders get there, Payne had already fallen. Third floor balcony, by the way, is where he fell and hit the ground. He was unresponsive and, later he was pronounced dead. So right away when we find this out, there are so many theories. Okay, what happened? Could he have been trying to escape? And this one I might give a little bit of weight to because according to some of the reports I've seen is, as I said, he was on the third floor balcony. On the second floor balcony, when investigators went through, combed the hotel, did all the things they do, they found a bag of his and it had whiskey in it and it said "for Liam." So some people are theorizing perhaps he thought, okay, yeah, I want to get out of this hotel room. He threw his bag down to the balcony right beneath his and then thought, okay, I'll hop down there and I'll climb out and everything will be good. So that's one of the theories. And then the other kind of goes hand in hand with all of this. The fact that there are reports that one of the hotel staff said, "Get him up to his hotel room. He's causing a ruckus in the lobby. We, actually want to carry him up to his room." So there are some reports that he couldn't stand. And so a couple of people kind of dragged him or helped him walk up to his room. And there are additional reports that in the past, he had been a user of drugs or alcohol. And some of his, I don't want to say handlers, and I don't mean that in a negative way, some of his team would shut him off in a hotel room. This had allegedly happened just a month prior, a different instance, where he's high or on drugs or something of the sort. And one of his team members is like, okay, let him wait it out. Put him in the hotel room, he'll get over it. It'll be fine. Like he'll come down and everything will be good. However, there had allegedly been a balcony in that room too. He hopped out and escaped then. So that's a couple of the theories there, that he was trying to escape, that this had happened in the past, but we do know he was alone in the hotel room. So it's not like somebody saw exactly what happened. And that's kind of where we get into even more questions too, because we know obviously he eventually lost consciousness. But the question is Liam Payne up on his balcony? He has the effects of drugs, alcohol, whatever, who knows what. He faints or something, and then he falls. Okay, that's number one. Number two, is he, awake? Something happens. He's coming over the side of the balcony. He loses consciousness before he falls. Number three, conscious all the way until he falls and hits the ground. And we'll talk about this in our interview. We don't know. I mean, this is a huge question to me, and we don't know. Something that's important to note, though, I think, is that suicide was ruled out pretty early on. So it seems that this is some sort of accidental situation. Now, when investigators went in the room, I talked about how they had previously found that bag and that whiskey bottle. They also found other things inside of Liam Payne's room, including narcotic supplies, drug paraphernalia, including a burnt candle, a burnt soda top of a can, aluminum foil, and a Dove soap carton, which seems to have carried some drugs. After Liam Payne's death, investigators obviously took a look at the body and they tested his blood and urine. They found ultimately that his cause of death was polytrauma, which means multiple different instances of trauma, the actual fall. As far as what was in his system, the blood alcohol content was 0.27, which here in America we're used to hearing 0.08 or 0.08. That level was more than 3 times over the legal driving limit. So it was quite a bit of alcohol in his system. There were also cocaine metabolites in his system, and we'll talk about this more in depth once we get to our interview. But I do want to read a report from the Argentinian authorities about all of this. The autopsy revealed that death was caused by multiple injuries and internal and external bleeding. It was also determined that the musician had a blood alcohol concentration of up to 2.7 grams per liter at the time of death, along with metabolites of cocaine, methylegonin, benzoylecamine, cocaine, and the medication sertraline. The forensic medical specialists who performed the autopsy indicated toxicology results showed the dead man consumed cocaine via his nose as well as inhaling it by smoking the drug. Consumption took place at least 72 hours prior to his death and up to a few minutes before his death. And I want to be clear here, I got this from the website of the Argentinian authorities. Like, I literally stopped this recording, walked over to my computer, and double checked, and it's there. And I honestly think they weren't trying to be rude. Like, when I say dead man, I'm quoting what they said, but it's because I translated it to English. Like, I don't think they were being that harsh purposely. I know there are a lot of 1D fans out there. I'm not coming for your guy. Okay, now at the time of all of this, that it first happens, by the way, I want to mention a lot of reports mentioned pink cocaine, and this is something else that was, in the zeitgeist and 1D fans were upset about. There were reports from reputable sites that, like People Magazine or NBC News talking about, pink cocaine. We'll dabble into this a bit in the interview, but I just read to you everything that was found in his system according to Argentinian authorities. Now, at the time, initially, he dies. Later on, there are a couple of charges that are filed, multiple, in fact, 5 people, including Gilda Martin, who was the hotel manager, a man by the name of Esteban Grazi, who was the chief receptionist, and another guy named Regilo or Roger Norris, who was Liam Payne's really good friend. Now, let's separate those and all of the allegations. First, there's the manager. What prosecutor says is she knew that Liam Payne was a threat to himself or others, and yet still let him go up to his hotel room where he could hurt himself or others. Prosecutors say she should have kept him somewhere safe until paramedics arrive. Okay, and then there's the chief receptionist. Prosecutors say he asked several people, as we've reported in this very episode, to drag Liam Payne up to his hotel room. And at this point, Liam Payne could barely stand. So prosecutors are like, it was your responsibility to keep him safe, to keep an eye on him. Why were you taking him away from the lobby? Then there's Roger, and now he had been a longtime friend of Liam Payne, and as we've reported, he did struggle with substance abuse issues, and it seems as though Roger was very supportive of him throughout his struggles in all of that. He also had been with Liam Payne every single day that he was in Argentina, and prosecutors were like, okay, why would you leave? It was your responsibility. You were being negligent by leaving, knowing that your friend couldn't stand or take care of himself. So these 3 were all charged. However, those charges were eventually dropped. I want to make note of that. All of their charges dropped. However, 2 people still face charges and now trial, which is why we're doing this episode. They're accused of supplying cocaine. Now let's go back to a statement from the Argentinian authorities about all of this. At the request of the head of the National Criminal and Correctional Prosecutor's Office number 14, Andres Esteban Madrea, the 2 defendants, remanded in custody as part of the court investigation into the circumstances surrounding Liam James Payne's death, will go to trial accused of the crime of selling drugs. They are Brian Nahul Pays, 25, who met Payne while working as a waiter in a restaurant in Puerto Madero, and Ezekiel David Pereira, 24, who was an employee at the Hotel Casa Sur Palermo, where the former One Direction member died 8 months ago after falling from the balcony of room 310 in a proven state of intoxication with cocaine, alcohol, and psychotropic drugs. So let's break those down a bit. Pays, the waiter who met Liam Payne while he was there on his trip to Argentina. Now, Pays has been very outspoken and says, I never sold him cocaine. Yes, we did drugs together, but I never accepted any of the money. Pereira, the employee at Casa Sur, is also accused of providing him with drugs, selling him drugs. Now, these 2 were arrested back in January, but do maintain their innocence. Okay, Scandal Squad, I know I still have a lot of questions about this case, and I bet you do too. So let's bring on today's guest, forensic chemist Bethany Pridgeton. Thank you, Bethany, for coming on today with us. And I just want to ask right from the top, I know that this is really complicated. We have the cause of death, and there are a multitude of factors that are going on with all of this. So how is cause of death determined generally?
I'm more of a forensic chemist, so I typically look at the drug side of things. But they're going to look at cause of death and then what led up to the death. So I believe in this case, the cause of death was the actual polytrauma, so the trauma to the body. But of course, they look at other contributing factors, like what led to the incident and when the death occurred.
Okay, that's what's wild in this case is because we have the drugs that were ingested and then the fall. So cause of death, yes, he actually hit the ground and, that's the cause of death. However, we have all of these chemicals in his system. And there are so many questions about what happened. Did he lose consciousness and then fall? Did he lose consciousness mid-fall? Or was it right when he hit the ground? Is that something that's difficult to determine when that would happen?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult because you have, again, multiple drugs, in the system. You have a very high blood alcohol level, 0.27. So that's more than 3 times the driving legal limit. So, of course, that's going to cause a lot of physical impairment. You've got the combination of, appears to be cocaine with alcohol, which can create a metabolite in the body that causes, longer term, stronger impairing effects of cocaine. So now you've got really high alcohol, very strong effects of cocaine impairment. Um, so you've already got these kind of physical impairments that could cause a fall to be accidental. Cocaine and alcohol use combined is also linked to suicide attempts. So you also have to consider, was there a history of, suicide attempts? Then you also see that there was sertraline, which is more commonly known as Zoloft in the system, which is an antidepressant. So there's a lot of factors that need to be considered when you see these multiple drugs and how they would affect someone. Would it be an accident? Was it a suicide? There's a lot going. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot going on here.
There is. Yeah. And we've actually followed this case since it happened. It was October of last year when it initially happened. And the reports first came out and were like, pink cocaine was in Liam Payne's system. And so I had reported on that too. And I've gone through since then. We've done other videos here on Scandal about Liam Payne and pink cocaine. And the comments went wild. And some people were like, yes, it was pink cocaine. And some people were like, no, it wasn't. What is she talking about? And so I tried to do a bit more research. And explain this to me, because the names of the things that were in his system, like the drugs, they weren't like straight up names like cocaine. They were these words that I, as a non-medical professional, don't use in my day-to-day vernacular. But can you explain it to me? Because pink cocaine is different than the traditional cocaine. And was that actually found in the system?
So they didn't find anything. They actually didn't find, at least from what I read, they didn't find cocaine specifically. It was the metabolites. So cocaine is a very fast-acting drug, and it breaks down very quickly in the body. So what they did find were the traditional metabolites of cocaine. So you've got the methylecgenin, the benzylecgenin, and then you've also got the cocaethylene, which was that's created by the combination of alcohol and cocaine together. So what we're seeing are the metabolites that you would expect to see from cocaine use, and you don't always see parent cocaine compound in a sample, and then especially in postmortem cases as well. Like so, there's the possibility that the sample wasn't tested immediately, and the cocaine could break down as well. But what we're seeing is just, at least from what I've read, is just the metabolites of cocaine.
Okay, and I want to point out to all the people who are watching, there's nothing that's like available for us, the public, a medical report exactly, because I looked for it and I was like, I'm going to find it. I'm going to, go through and do my due diligence. So we're doing the best we can. So that was a great explainer to kind of go through and talk about it. And I think what's interesting too is when I saw the report from Argentinian officials, they said something like he had consumed or ingested these drugs, these items, up to 72 hours before his death, or it could have been up to a couple minutes before his death. And to me, that's kind of a big range. Is there any way to narrow it down?
So I would be interested to see how they came to that range. Estimating time of use is very difficult in forensic toxicology, and it gets even more difficult in postmortem cases. So typically, it's very difficult to pinpoint an exact time of use. What we do know is that cocaine typically has a half life of about 40 minutes in the body, which means that it breaks down very quickly into those metabolites. So you could see those metabolites and not see the parent cocaine compound, and from testing and with in less than an hour from recent use. And then the metabolites can be found in the body for up to days after use. So that's probably why they're giving the range, because you really can't pinpoint. Again, because you could see the benzylecgenin is seen sometimes up to 72 hours after last use. So a lot of times it's the history, or if there's other people involved that can kind of give some information about use. But if someone's kind of using on their own, again, you're going to have these big ranges because you can see these metabolites for quite a long period of time.
It seems to me like it's a catch all, and I'm not knocking them at all, but based on your answer there, it's got to be hard to say, okay, yes, he ingested it at 4:17 and 23 seconds. Like, I wish we could do that, but it doesn't seem like we're really able to, at least at this point. So it makes sense that they're like covering all their bases. He could have taken it here, he could have taken it here. But I do think that's what makes things more complicated as we're looking ahead to trial, because the two people who are charged right now are charged in relation to, providing him with cocaine. And so, is that where things are going to get really tricky when it comes time for trial and testimony? If these people are saying, yeah, the time frame doesn't quite match up, is that where someone like you would maybe testify about it?
Right. I think a lot of times when you get to these, like they're trying to pinpoint a time frame, you can often get to like what we would refer to as like battle of the experts. So you may have an expert from each side kind of going, kind of one's opining to a time frame and another is opining to another time frame and trying to support those arguments. I think the presence of the metabolite that combines cocaine and alcohol is helpful because at least we know that cocaine was used with alcohol. But again, we don't know, was alcohol being consumed constantly and that's why we were at such a high level? Was it being consumed over days so the level never went back down to a very low or zero level? But yeah, I mean, it's going to, this part, again, you can't really pinpoint exact time unless you have some type of like, video testimony or witness testimony that's going to support, the opinions that the experts will give. Otherwise, it could come down to a battle of opinion from the experts on the time frame based on the information they're provided.
And the two defendants we have here are charged with selling or supplying cocaine to Liam Payne. However, you mentioned something super important, which is the alcohol level that he had, which was off the charts in terms of legality. I mean, here in the United States, 0.08 is, the legal limit. And I do want to specify, I'm not saying like, this is terrible, you shouldn't have been doing it. I'm just saying like, based on the like charts, it was off the charts. It was quite a bit. And so they're charged with this cocaine portion of it. But is it possible that the alcohol level in his system is what played a larger role in the fall?
I mean, at that level, it absolutely could. So I think that it's interesting that to try to pinpoint anything on one specific compound or drug when you have multiple. And I've seen cases like this before where they try to focus in on one drug that's present, but they all have an effect. And cocaine and alcohol together really cause greater effects combined of each one's impairments. They don't balance each other out because one's a stimulant and one's a depressant. They actually can enhance the effects. And again, that metabolite that's produced by cocaine and alcohol together can actually really increase the impairments that are felt in terms of, physical abilities. So it's hard to pinpoint again on, you can't just say cocaine caused it. I would, you know, tend to lean towards the combination of this high alcohol level. But something also important to remember on cases where there's a death involved is that the alcohol levels aren't always exact either. So this is a very high alcohol level, but in post-mortem cases, so in death cases, there, depending on how much time it took from the time of the death to the collection of the samples, as well as the testing, there could be some postmortem distribution of alcohol throughout the body. Sometimes if there's trauma and bacteria gets in the sample, there could be an increase in alcohol level by the time it's tested. So it's not specifically that it was at 0.27. It would be hard to say that it was much, much lower where it wasn't impairing at these high levels, but it could have been different than what the final reported result was later at the time of the incident.
Oh, that's so interesting because I studied journalism in school. Like, I did not do much of the scientific type of thing. And to me, just I would think, oh, okay, well, it would have gone down from the time he ingested to when eventually this postmortem was done. But based on what you're saying, is who knows what could have happened? It could have maybe been higher afterwards. So that's just kind of interesting for our viewers to know. And something you talked about too, this might be in the weeds, but I'm just interested. You talked about the combination of alcohol and then cocaine or something of the like in the system. How does that make one react? Like, what does it do to the body and how does the person act when they have both those things in their system?
So it puts a lot of physical stress on the body when you're giving it a very potent stimulant, but you're also giving it well, at these levels potent depressants as well. So the body's kind of fighting itself, right? So you have an increased heart level from cocaine, but then alcohol is going to want to slow things down. So it puts a lot of stress and strain on the body. And again, these two drugs together, not all drugs do this, but you have to look at different combinations of drugs. But cocaine and alcohol actually cause the effects of each drug to be greater than they would if they had been taken individually. So that's important to recognize, is that it actually makes it longer lasting. So you're putting the body under more strain and more impairment for a longer period of time by combining the two drugs and creating this cocaethylene in the body.
Wow, that's so interesting to think about because I feel like with this case specifically, people are focusing so much on the cocaine, and it's likely because this is an illegal substance, and we have people who are charged in relation to providing him with that. We don't have people charged for providing him alcohol because, that's legal in a way. So, however, they're so important matched together. The alcohol is just as important, it seems, based on it being taken together, based on the levels that he had. I don't know. I just want to flag that for our viewers because I think that's interesting. But I do want to talk about the cocaine. Again, I know I just said that that's all anyone's talking about, but it's because we've got the charges, right? And in other cases, we have seen people be charged with a death related to cocaine if the person were to overdose in some way. But this is a bit different because it wasn't an overdose. It was, a fall and the trauma that he sustained because of that. So does that make things a bit different? The fact that it was a fall and he had cocaine and alcohol in his system versus it was death by cocaine by an overdose.
I mean, every case is going to be different, but at the end of the day, there was a personal use, right? So the effects are there. A lot of times when we see the overdose, we often look at the drug to see was there something else combined with it? Was it stronger than maybe what they would typically take? But again, people, yes, provide an illegal substance, but also people choose to use them, right? So whether it's an overdose or an accidental fall, the overdose is also accidental as well, right? So like there was no intention necessarily when someone uses for them to pass away. So I feel like they're similar in that way, in that, the intention was to use the drug for whatever purpose, but certainly not to fall off the balcony and or overdose.
And again, I talked about the charges being selling or supplying cocaine. And at least one of these defendants is saying, yes, I did cocaine with him, or I had cocaine and he had it, but I didn't sell it to him. And to me, I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I know this is a step back from the chemistry of it all, but what are your thoughts about that? The fact that he's saying, okay, I didn't sell it. He just, I gave it to him or he had it, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if how the laws are in Argentina and how they differ from the laws in the United States in terms of is there a difference between selling, profiting from it versus just, we're at a party, we're hanging out and we're using together. So I know that there are, places where people can be held accountable for using together, for example, heroin, fentanyl, and then leaving the person to die when they realize that they overdose. And of course, there's some accountability there in some states, for that, even though they didn't profit from it. But I imagine that there are, different levels and different places for that. Are you profiting from it, or was it just, kind of a share situation? So it'd be interesting to see if Argentina has some type of, breakdown for those different types of situations.
And this is a interesting case for so many reasons, but also the fact that we have a person from the United Kingdom. He died in Argentina. We're here in the United States talking about it. And so there's so many different nationalities, countries, things going on. So we're kind of using our best resources to figure out what's going on in Argentina. And I guess that's kind of leading into my next question in all of this. So to the best of your ability, because obviously we're here in the United States, and we talked about this a bit, but witness testimony, if experts are going to go on the stand, like if you are going to testify in this case, what do you expect to talk about?
I think it would, for me, with my background, science is science no matter where you are in the world. So that's the nice part, is that it's, we're able to rely on scientific resources from all over the world, to help opine to, whatever we are being asked to talk about. So, I would primarily talk about some of the stuff we talked about today, the metabolites that were present. Obviously, it would be nice, like you said, to have a full report, because if you're an expert in the case, you're going to see a lot more information in terms of if they did any quantitative levels, like how much of of the metabolites were present, being able to see the times that passed between, the death, the collection of the samples, and then again, the testing of the samples. And all those things would be very important to help a toxicologist kind of opine to, what was going on, and what the levels were, and could they estimate a tighter time frame of use. So, I mean, that would be what I would expect to talk about if I were asked to testify.
And we talked about this before. I really liked your phrase, the battle of the experts, because we have heard that before. I mean, the prosecution, the defense usually brings experts on most sides. We see this in most of the trials that we cover. And do you expect that it's possible that we could hear different things from different experts? I know what you said about how science is the same no matter what, whether it's here in America or Argentina or wherever it is, but could they have different opinions?
Yeah, it's definitely possible that they could reach different conclusions. A lot, all of us are going to have some level of, we hate to say it, no one wants to say that it exists, but cognitive bias, right? So a lot of times people can, find resources that will support their opinion, so that they can give their opinion, and then someone else can say, well, yeah, but there's also these studies that say this opposing thing. Something that I do try to do when I testify in cases is, I'm, reaching a conclusion, but then I kind of ask myself, well, how would someone, say, I don't agree with you, and how do I defend that and support it with scientific, information and resources? So they could reach, different conclusions, but, at the end of the day, certain things are, I would expect them to agree on, such as the metabolites that are present, how that, why they were there, is this what we expect to see? Is that a high alcohol level? Does that impair all people at that level? Those are things I would expect both sides to agree on.
I mean, one thing's for sure, this case is so just heartbreaking and shocking, absolutely unexpected. So, whatever happens in the trial, we'll be following to see what happens. Bethany, thank you for coming on with us today. You did such a good job of breaking down a topic that's really hard for someone like me to understand and make it digestible so that we could kind of understand everything that's going on. So, thank you so much for coming on Scandal with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me.
Overall, this is such a tragic case with a really passionate fan base too. And I love that you guys are watching and asking so many questions. And we still have so many. We just want answers. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out at trial. And for those updates, please subscribe to our channel right now so that you can get them as soon as we have any updates on this case or other celebrity cases. And also, make sure to continue sending us emails. Our tip line is scandal@lawandcrime.com, and we love seeing all your emails. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.